Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida will meet with President Biden later on Wednesday in the first official White House visit by a Japanese leader in nearly a decade. That will be followed by a three-way summit with the Philippines as the US seeks to counter China in the Indo-Pacific. Let's bring in Rahm Emanuel, who's the US ambassador to Japan, who joins us live from the White House lawn. And it's a beautiful evening for you to be joining us. We appreciate your time as always, Ambassador. Give us your context, I guess, in terms of the implications of this visit, the timing. Why has this happened? As we've just mentioned, it hasn't happened in a long time. This is all in the context of countering the ambitions and the moves that we see from Beijing.
Well, two points I would add is that this comes at a historic moment for both countries as they change dramatically their kind of deterrence posture and position. Japan's changed in the last 2 years 5 separate policies that have been basically on the books for 70 years, from the size of the defense budget, the counter-strike capability in the defense area, normalizing and bringing the level of relationship with the ROK, the Republic of Korea, to a new, more solid strategic level. The United States also has made some fundamental changes, going from a hub and spoke system to a lattice multinational type of strategic architecture. And I kind of see this state visit, the fourth from a head of state in the region out of 5 that the president's done, as kind of putting a period at the end of one era that's defined as alliance protection and beginning to write the first chapter of the new era of alliance projection with Japan. And that's not just for the Indo-Pacific, but also as a key strategic partner in a global set of issues. The second thing, it's kind of bookend. The week started with Australia, the United States, Japan, and the Philippines doing naval and air exercises together in a new multinational effort, and have the end the week with a historic first ever trilateral between the United States, Japan, and the Philippines head of state. That reflects and symbolizes the change in the United States approach. It also symbolizes the kind of role that Japan's going to play as a constant in our relationships in the area. But it also symbolizes China's whole strategy is to isolate the Philippines, isolate Australia with their economic coercion, isolate Japan by not accepting their fish to be exported. Our strategy is to flip that script and make the isolated party China. They're the ones that are isolated in the South China Sea as it relates to the Philippines. They're the ones that are isolated when it comes to trying to use economic coercion to coerce Australia to change their posture. And they become the isolated party, which is why they throw in the towel on that effort. So that's how this state visit. It's been 9 years since the last Japanese prime minister has had a visit, but it comes at a critical juncture where the relationship will pivot into a new kind of posture and a new position.
I wanted to hone in, Ambassador. You've mentioned, of course, the first Trilateral summit with the Philippines. How far do you expect Japan to involve itself when it comes to these confrontations in the South China Sea, where, of course, these encounters tend to be more aggressive than what we see in the East China Sea?
Well, the whole goal is not to have a conflict. That's what credible deterrence is. And understanding that this is not China versus the Philippines. This is China trying to coerce the Philippines into changing their policy, of which the International Court in 2016 ruled was in favor of the Philippines, not China. And understanding that China needs to understand that the Philippines has some very, very important friends in the neighborhood, the United States, Japan, and Australia in this situation. And it's all about bringing a level of credibility to the deterrence, whether that's on the diplomatic front, the defense side, or the economic development side. And you will see that take place in real time. And since we announced the trilateral, you can see China's change in the behavior and their sense of that. In the same way that when the president hosted the president of Korea and the prime minister of Japan at Camp David in August, that was a major shift in the strategic sands and underpinnings in the region, because China's entire strategy is to keep Korea, Japan, and the United States isolated from each other, not on the same page, which is what was achieved at Camp David.
I'm interested, this sort of lattice type structure, how strong that is, especially when you hear things like, for instance, South Korea's reported to be planning a three-way summit with China and Japan next month. So what's the sort of response, and what would the US be making of that?
Well, I know what happened since I was there at Camp David. We'll see. Obviously, we have this historic one, first time ever between the leaders of the Philippines, Japan, and the United States. But this lattice structure is a fundamental shift in the United States to a more multinational approach, whether it comes to military exercises, economic development, or whether it comes to diplomatic initiatives. And it replaces what was a siloed hub and spoke in a more integrated way. And it brings a level of not only deterrence, it reminds China, and there's two operative theories here. China's theory is, this is our neighborhood. You either get in line or you're going to get the treatment that the Philippines are getting or any other country like Australia just recently experienced over the last 3 years. Our posture is we're a permanent Pacific power and presence, and you can bet long on the United States. And when you look at where we were 5 years ago, when you look at where we are today, China is on their back foot, and there's ever greater momentum behind the United States pledge. We're a permanent power, you can bet long, which is why countries are actually working together on every one of those kind of strategic levels, from development to deterrence to diplomacy, to work together in not lockstep so much, but in coordination and cohesion with the United States' approach.
But then what about China's approach and how it plays into it? And as I said, South Korea perhaps planning a three-way summit between China and Japan. So how can the US sort of counter that approach from Beijing as well, that could also be looking to have its own lattice-type structures in place?
Well, first of all, China has no treaty allies except for North Korea. Second of all, China is never going to win the award for the best neighbor policy. They've had 2 land conflicts already with India. They're having a constant kind of minor kinetic with the Philippines. They fired 5 missiles into Japan's EEZ. There's nobody in the neighborhood that China's not in some way claiming their real estate or having some economic or political confrontation with. So they can try a trilat, and great. Anything that deters China and understands there's consequences to try to use raw power rather than a rules-based system is a good thing. But I think China's reacting to the United States, not initiating where we're reacting. That the reason they want a Japan, Korea, China trilateral meeting is in a reaction to what the president achieved. They're trying to minimize that, which goes to underscore what I've said earlier, which is 5 years ago you would not have put that the initiative was on the United States. It's not a major gust of wind, but the wind is at our sails, where China, both at home and in the neighborhood, is on their back heel. And they're trying to make up for lost time.
What's the risk of US initiatives being undermined by election changes in the US itself, given we are approaching that vote in November, and Donald Trump potentially inclined to overturn Biden policies if he wins?
Well, first and foremost, I would say that when it comes to kind of the area of the Indo-Pacific and China, we're strong because of our allies and alliances. What we're building here is starting to be put down in the roots of the institutions of whether it's Korea, Japan, the United States, Japan, and the Philippines, or whether it's the Quad, India, Australia, Japan, and the United States. That's being woven into the DNA of not only the strategy, but the institutions that help uphold those strategies or strategic areas. But I think we should be also honest. President Biden brings a level of commitment that all the other leaders respond to, that he values allies and the alliances that they're part of and sees them as core to America's strategy. So the advances over the last 3 years being built and being put into kind of wired into the DNA? Yes. Can a leader that doesn't believe in that start to roll the rock back down the hill? Could. But I think there's enough progress, and everybody in the institutions understands how this goes to the core strategic interest, where the United States doesn't want to be alone. They want to isolate China. That means our allies are key partners in that strategy.
From within Japan, in your role, are you getting more questions that perhaps suggest there is a rising degree of noise and uncertainty and concern about what the outcome might be post-November?
Well, I think you should, first of all, obviously I know a little about American politics. There's obviously people are watching American politics. And they're watching because it has a keen interest. There's a keen interest in who the president is and what their ideas are. Yeah, the people are interested in American politics because it has consequences. Elections have consequences. Of course they're interested, and they ask me about it. That doesn't mean they're not interested, like in this state visit, of doubling down on their partnership with the United States, because they know it's in their strategic interest and it's in our strategic interest that they're aligned with us.
Ambassador, when we spoke to you back in May last year, you talked about the Micron deal with Japan really being a way to counter Chinese coercion in the tech and strategic space. Do you expect more to come out of PM Kishida's visit this time in terms of further investment to try and extend that lead that Japan and the US are trying to build?
Two things I would say. One is I went this morning, Microsoft announced a $3 billion investment in data and AI capacity and research in Japan. We also just announced Carnegie Mellon and Keio University in Japan will be doing research on AI, as will the University of Washington and Tsukuba University in Japan. There'll be $50 million, $110 million collectively by major corporations to back up that AI research in the 4 universities, 2 U.S., 2 Japan, building on what we did in Hiroshima with the University of Chicago and Tokyo University in the quantum computing space. We've put together around $260+ million just in the 2 areas of research of AI and quantum computing. That has a material economic benefit and material benefit to keeping the 2 countries ahead in some of the most important research areas that China's putting a ton of resources into. So there will be other type of commercial diplomacy. The Prime Minister will be going down to North Korea after his visit here at the White House, looking at Toyota's $13.9 billion EV investment in the United States and a Honda auto factory. For the last 4 years, Japan has been the #1 foreign direct investor in the United States, and we have been the #1 in Japan, and that's what's going to continue.
Ambassador, I'm curious about the U.S. opposition perhaps to Nippon Steel overtaking United States Steel and what that signifies to Japanese companies that are looking to make investments inside the U.S. Is there perhaps a need to think about the role that election year politics plays in investment strategies then?
Well, here's what I would say is, as I just said, for 4 years in a row, the United States and Japan are the #1 foreign investors in each other's respective countries. Japanese companies employ 1 million Americans, one of the largest in the world. Number 2, 6 weeks ago, Mitsui Corporation from Japan received a $20 billion contract to replace all the cranes in all our ports because we don't trust the Chinese cranes that are there from a national security basis. Nothing says trusted ally more than a $20 billion contract to a Japanese company. And then I would remind everybody that in 2021, when there was an election in Japan, some foreign entities were looking at buying Toshiba, and Japan said for national security interests, that's not going to be permitted. So there's a context here. One is that the relationship is bigger, more significant than a single commercial transaction. And 2, there have been things in both with Mitsui 6 weeks ago, as well as back in 2021 with Toshiba, that actually put this all in context. So it is, in the United States, continues to be a target of investment from semiconductors, from Japan, autos, EVs, food, pharmaceutical, financial services. And Japan continues to be a #1 market for the United States as an investor in the Japanese economic growth and economic capacity. And that's going to continue, whether there's a disagreement on a single transaction.
All right, Ambassador, thanks so much for your time this evening. That was Rahm Emanuel, the U.S. Ambassador to Japan.